Welcome to the Product Design Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Coelen, founder of UX Cabin, where we create world-class web and mobile apps. I'm excited to bring you a behind-the-scenes look into the lives of some of the most interesting and talented people in product design. We'll get strategic advice on how they got to where they are today and things they wish they would have known earlier in their career. Hey, welcome to the Product Design Podcast. We have a really exciting episode for you all today. Today we have Danielle Justilien. She is a UX designer that works at IBM. Danielle, we are so thrilled to have you here.
Thank you. Yes, I'm excited to be here and share my journey. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We were introduced by someone who followed the podcast and thought you'd be a great guest. I think your background from this individual, you had gone through a boot camp. And we've had all sorts of people on here that have come through from graphic design backgrounds, from completely unique backgrounds. And so I'm excited to hear your story and dive into the details of how you got to where you are today. But why don't you tell us just a little bit about who you are, where you live, and what you do?
So like you said, my name is Danielle. I'm a UX designer based in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm originally from Florida, went to school in Orlando. Did a short stint in New York City after that, working in media, and landed here in Raleigh doing UX design. I'm currently working at IBM and working on software design for IBM's partner experience. It's a bit of a complex space that I've been learning through, but just learning to design software for partners to come in and work with IBM to build and certify and sell their software through IBM. So that's what I've been doing the past year and 2 months or so.
That's awesome. Very cool. So was UX something that you always wanted to get into, or did you kind of stumble into it?
Yeah, it was definitely a stumble, a big stumble. I kind of started in high school learning a bit about graphic design, and that was something I was always interested in. And throughout college, I had a freelance business kind of on the side doing brand design for small businesses. And I never really knew about UX design until I started looking at different career paths and looking to change what I was doing in my day-to-day, and came across UX. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is actually something that's really interesting. And sounds like something I've been doing my entire life. With my background in marketing, there were a lot of transferable skills that kind of moved into UX. And also having that design background, it kind of felt like the perfect space for me. So yeah, it was kind of something I stumbled upon, and it ended up being a perfect fit for me. And it was something I was more passionate about working towards, and I actually saw as a career path for myself. So yeah, it was a great stumble.
That is incredible. So you kind of stumbled into it. So what were the first little pieces that really got your gears turning as to this could be a viable career path for me? And it's not only viable, but it's something I really want to do.
Yeah. There were a lot of different things that kind of confirmed it for me. When I first found UX design, there was nobody I had ever met knew that had done UX design or was a UX designer. So I kind of just started with LinkedIn and like going on LinkedIn and seeing, okay, what are the people that are doing UX design doing? What kind of companies do they work for? Things like that. And for me, it was really, as a Black woman as well, it was hard to kind of see myself in that space, especially like within the tech space. And one of the first searches I did on LinkedIn, I ran into a woman named Jessica Gaddis, who had a space for Black designers in tech. And she was like one of the first people that made me feel like, oh, this is something I can do. Like there was a whole space that she created with Black female designers, and it made me feel comfortable being able to step into that space and learn what I needed to learn, and feel comfortable knowing that it was possible to kind of work into that space. And with that, that's kind of what pushed me to kind of look into boot camps and starting to look at different ways to get into UX design. And then while I was in New York City, I ran into a free boot camp called CUNY Tech Works. I think it's called CUNY Design Works now. And with it being free, it was kind of like a no-brainer of I kind of should go after this and learn what I need to learn to get into design. So at that time, I was still working full-time in media, but I decided to quit my job because the boot camp was full-time. Yeah, so I decided to quit my job, focus on UX for that full 4 months. And by the end of the program, I was lucky enough or blessed enough to get hired by IBM. And that's when it kindly felt like, okay, I'm really doing this. Like, this is something that's actually happening. So, yeah, it was definitely a lot of kind of things that lined up along the way that really made it feel like UX was where I needed to be, which was great.
Wow, that is incredible. What an exciting journey. Now, does this free boot camp, do they basically just make their money and funding off of sponsors, or how do they
That's
operate?
a good question. I know that it's government funded. I know when I initially got into it, it was funded by Obama's administration at the time that I was in it. And we also got like a government stipend at the end of it. It was some part of program of like continuing education with CUNY's, well, New York City's college. So that was kind of how it was funded. And you had to apply for the program and be accepted and everything. So yeah, it ended up being completely free. So especially in comparison to the boot camps that are around now, they're thousands of dollars. So it was kind of like a
Right.
no brainer to, jump into that. So
That is so cool. So, what were your assumptions like about what UX design was before you got into your boot camp? Was it totally below your mind? Did you feel like you knew kind of what you were expecting? Tell me about your thought processes before and after.
yeah. And when I was in the process of kind of deciding if I wanted to do UX, I initially started with doing some like online researches and courses and YouTube videos just to learn more about UX before I fully committed to it. So I do feel that I came into the boot camp with some type of knowledge of what was happening, some foundational knowledge of UX. So I don't think anything was a
Sure.
complete surprise, but there were definitely a lot of areas that I hadn't explored. And of course, there was a lot of depth that I hadn't gotten to in my own research.
Sure.
So there was a lot in terms of like just different design rules and different ways to design for different screen sizes and things like that, just that were extremely helpful in understanding how UX is really impacted throughout different products and different goals and problems that needed to be solved. So I think the program really provided a lot of that foundational knowledge.
Yeah. Now, how long was the program?
The program was 4 months, I want to say, from August to December of 2020. So yeah, it wasn't too long. It was broken up into four different sections, starting off with, I think, visual design and then UX foundations. And then there was a coding portion of it as well, which was pretty challenging. And then a capstone project where we got to work with a real world client. And my team actually got to work with like a nonprofit startup that was in New York and got to deliver a web application for them. So yeah, in those 4 months, we did a lot.
That's fantastic. That is so cool. So, going into it, did you know you wanted to be more on like the UI design side of things or more on like the research side of things? Or did you try to want to do a little bit of everything?
Yeah, that's a great question. Going into it initially, before I got into the program, I did a lot of like networking and talking to other designers about just their past and their career and how they got into design. And one thing that really stuck with me, and I can't remember who said it, but one thing that stuck with me was that it's better to go into design as a generalist and then find your niche or the specific thing that you want to work on rather than going in with a specialization and then trying to jump into different specializations within UX. So for me, I went into the program really wanting to get a general foundation of UX. I knew that I also had my visual background and an interest in visual design and a little bit in content design. So I did like pay special attention to those things as I was going through my program, but I knew that I wanted to get a general well-rounded foundation of UX. So I kind of went in with the idea of just getting that general knowledge.
Yeah. So, give us a little insight into how being a UX designer has impacted your life at this point.
Yeah, it's impacted it in so many ways, even outside of like my job and my career path. And like UX has really changed my life in a lot of ways, in that it's opened my eyes to a whole world of like possibilities for myself. I think in going through college and going throughout my career, I kind of had my sights set on marketing because this was the one thing that I enjoyed and I still do enjoy marketing. And it's like they kind of tell you when you go through college, like this is your major and this is what you're going to do for the rest of your life. But that's not the case. And I feel like I definitely had that mindset. And I think UX kind of opened my eyes to what I'm really capable of, just going through that boot camp and like learning different things about the world and the tech space and design really opened my eyes to what's possible, and being able to solve different problems through design really gave me a new perspective on the world and what I'm able to do with my own skills that I have. And with that also came like the community of people that came with design. I think one thing that you don't really know until you're in it is that design has such an amazing community surrounding it within LinkedIn and different communities within design. There are just so many people that are willing to help you, so many people that you can talk to about design, so many different niches and specific topics about design that you can find, and find people who you can relate to. So with that, like I found so many great mentors, so many great friends and colleagues that I can just relate to just on a level of design. And also by like sharing my story, I've been able to help other people who are just aspiring to come into design or aspiring to come into tech. And that's really helped me to be able to just like encourage myself and like sharing my story and being able to share my journey and encourage others, and kind of being able to see others walk into the things that they are wanting to accomplish has been like a great thing for me to experience and to see other people do. So yeah, that's been great. And I think another thing, moving into tech, I think a lot of things that like people don't talk about is the financial freedom that comes with it as well. Like coming from media and moving into technology really gave me the ability to see what's possible for my future. Being able to see a firm career path and the way that I'm able to elevate has been amazing. And yeah, I'm just excited to actually see what my future can look like being a designer.
That is so awesome. So obviously there's people who want to break into UX design. Maybe they've done boot camps, maybe they're self-taught, but they're kind of at the stage before getting the job, right? And what I always say is like getting that first job is always the hardest thing. After you get that, it's like you get the on the job training, you get experience, you get a little bit more network, but that first job is really the hardest thing to get. So throughout your boot camp, what strategies did you use to help get you that first job?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, a big part of getting my first job was being involved in community. I think during my boot camp, it wasn't just being the work that I was doing within the boot camp, but also being involved in the design community overall. I was making sure that I was connecting with other designers, getting mentorship from other people, getting feedback on my portfolio and my designs, getting advice about interviewing before I was even interviewing, and making sure that I was just staying informed about all that it takes to become a designer and to really land that first job. I also got involved in different design communities so I could work on projects outside of my actual boot camp and get those ready for my portfolio. So I think it was really just really diving deep into UX and making sure I was surrounded by all of the people that I needed, all of the resources that I needed, taking the time to really set aside to get into everything that I needed to learn to be able to be prepared for actually interviewing and getting my portfolio ready. And with that, I think working on my portfolio really hard was part of what really prepared me. I really spent a lot of time, a lot of hours into building those case studies to really be able to sell myself as a designer when I went into interviews. And with that, after finishing my portfolio, I made sure that I shared it with probably 10 or 15 other experienced designers to get feedback and make sure that I was in the place to really be able to talk about myself and show myself as a designer, and really be able to just have my skills kind of shine throughout my portfolio. And that was one thing that my manager kind of said, kind of sold me on our team, was just the ability of my skills that was shown through my portfolio. And I think that's an important thing that I know that there's a lot of emphasis on portfolios for UX designers, and there's a lot of controversy on whether or not they're necessary, especially as a junior designer. But I do feel like it is what kind of helps show who you are as a designer and how you work amongst your other team members and what you can kind of bring to the table. And I think that's really what kind of prepared me in really being able to do the job that I'm doing now.
Yeah, that's great. So I think one thing that you mentioned that's really important is like, and it's really hard to do because designers, I think by nature are very attached to their work. The things that they do are personal. And there's kind of this tendency of like, they kind of want to hide everything until it's ready to show it. And if you're just only showing it like the first time at an interview or a prospective employer, there's going to be things, especially as a junior, as someone breaking into it new, that you could have improved or could have had feedback on. So I think the idea that you sent yours to 10 different people to give you feedback, I'm sure was extremely helpful and probably a little bit, I don't want to say hurtful, but you probably had to have some tough skin to just say, yeah, okay, I get it. I need to improve there. I could make this better. And that's kind of like that can be a painful experience, at least in my point of view. But yeah, I think that is a fantastic idea to give it out to more seasoned designers and ask for that feedback. I remember talking to my good friend who recently just got a job, and he spoke to the fact of his first interview was just grueling and it was just incredibly hard, but it was a good experience. And then the next time he did it, he was a little bit more prepared for it, and he knew more what to say, knew more what they might be looking for, and knew how to answer those questions. So I think even just like treating each interview as an opportunity to learn, and knowing that you can get more interviews, you can get more opportunities, and you can always learn from those, I think is a really big key.
I think that's part of being a designer. Like, even in my everyday work, I'm constantly showing my work and having to get feedback from other designers and stakeholders. So why not apply that to our portfolio? Why not start early and start learning how to receive feedback, receive constructive criticism, and apply it to our work? So yeah, kind of as you're speaking of it now, I feel like that kind of prepared me for what I'm doing now, because that feedback is always helpful. Especially if it's coming from an experienced designer, you're learning something new. They have perspective that you don't.
Totally. So I'm interested to hear a little bit more about your case studies, because I think most people coming out of boot camps do have some sort of portfolio or case study that they, have worked towards. What what specifically about your portfolio or your case studies did you do that you think gave you an edge or help you stood out?
Yeah, I think for me, and this was another thing one of my managers told me, was kind of the storytelling as well as the visual design of my portfolio. For me, it was really important for my portfolio to actually reflect who I am as a designer. I wanted it to, like, when you click into it, it's like, this looks like Danielle. And that was really important for me. And I think that kind of did shine through in my portfolio. So kind of through my case study, there are different elements of visual design and interaction design. Case studies can be very wordy. So to kind of break things up and kind of help tell the story and make things a little pretty, I think that definitely added to it. And also just keeping the case study itself and the copy within the case study very specific to the work that I'm able to do. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just telling the story of what happened, but like, here's what I did specifically. Here's the work that I did. Here's some of the things that I learned. Here's probably what didn't go so well. Just really explaining like who I am as a designer and like kind of walking the user through my own thought process. And with that, I kind of thought of my portfolio as another user experience like projects. I wanted the user to be able to flow through my case study easily and to be able to understand it and follow it easily with different headings and things like that. So yeah, just making it something that's digestible, because that was another piece of advice that I got. When hiring managers are looking at our portfolios, they're literally going hundreds or dozens a day, and it's very easy to get lost. So you want to include something that's easy for the hiring manager to look through quickly, able to pick up on who you are as a designer and be able to decide whether or not they want to move forward with you. So that was kind of what I had in mind as I was building my portfolio.
That's really good. I'm pulling up your portfolio now and looking at it. Obviously, folks won't be able to see it when they're just listening to the podcast. But I think one thing that's especially good about yours is just all of the visual hierarchies that you have to break things up. Because I think a lot of portfolios can feel too dense and too like just like block of text, and there's hard to pull out the insights and the key points. But I think yours does a really good job of breaking it up between visuals and imagery and type and headers that really let you skim it and get to points of interest. Because it's like, whenever I'm reading a case study, rarely am I going to read it from top to bottom. I'm going to jump around, look at little pieces that interest me, but it's not like word for word thing. Yeah. It's like I want to see all the parts in the process. Maybe I want to drill into like one or two specific things. But yeah, so I think, anyone who's listening to this will definitely link up your portfolio into the notes here. But this is a fantastic portfolio for explaining your processes and not being too heavy on one particular aspect of it. So absolutely, congrats on that. I'm curious as to how you built this portfolio. I know you said you took a little bit of coding. Did you use some sort of like hosted platform to build this? Did you work with a developer to do it, or how did you get this up and
Yeah,
running?
no, I definitely use it a hosted platform. I use Wix to build my portfolio because, like I said, I previously had a freelance business doing brand design, and a lot of websites I'd done in the past were on Wix. So I knew I wanted to go with something that wasn't as much of a learning curve. There were other students
Sure.
in our bootcamp who did completely code their own portfolio, but I didn't personally want to take the time to learn how to code while also building my portfolio. So yeah, I did it through Wix. And another piece of advice that I got as I was learning about portfolio building was to actually start with writing the case study first, just writing out the copy and the different headings. So with each of my case studies, I went into an Excel sheet, kind of just put the headings that I wanted to start with and just started writing out the copy for them. If you're building your portfolio and writing at the same time, it's easy to get caught up in the visual design and heading should go
Yeah.
here and this should happen there. And it's really easy to, yeah, get caught up in that and lose sight of, okay, what's the actual story that you're telling? So yeah, I started an Excel sheet building out the copy for each of the case studies and then moved it into Wix where I designed it and added in the colors and the illustrations and all of the artifacts from the actual project. And yeah, kind of just put it together through that. And a lot of it was definitely pieces that I picked from other people's portfolios. I definitely didn't come up with everything on my own, but I did a lot of research on what a good UX portfolio looks like and kind of took different pieces from different portfolios and made it my own.
That's awesome. Now, I think there's a few different strategies about like putting together a good case study. And obviously it's like depending on like what you want to do, what type of project it was. But did you focus more on the outcome of the project? Did you focus more on the process? Or did you focus more on your individual contribution to the whole?
Yeah, I would say a combination. I would say the process was definitely something I wanted to focus on just because I wanted to be able to express the different methodologies and practices and artifacts that I was able to create and use either with my team or on my own. But I think another important part was kind of differentiating what I did versus what another team member did. Because also at the top of each case study, I included whether I was a UX designer or a visual designer. But I also wanted to be able to call out like this specific thing I worked on. Like I built this persona, or I did the research on this, or I did the prototype for this, just so that when hiring managers or anyone else is looking at my portfolio, they can actually tell what I did versus what other team members did and what I brought to the project myself. But yeah, I definitely wanted to include the full process of how we got to our outcome so that there's some context behind how we got here and what are some of the challenges, how are users involved in actually creating the prototype or the live product.
Sure. Very cool. Did you have to interview a lot? Did you have a lot of different prospects and places that you were trying to get into? Did this one just come along quick and you kind of fell into your lap? Or how did the job prospecting process go for you?
Yeah, I do think I was blessed in that my job prospect process wasn't too tough. I probably went through about 5 interviews with 5 different companies, got to maybe 2 or 3 third round interviews. And I had one other job offer at the time that I was offered the job with IBM as well. I know it's not a normal story or a normal case. The IBM one actually came from my cousin who was working with IBM in Austin. She suggested a job posting that she saw. And I applied for that one, but that wasn't even the one I ended up getting because when I was on the website, I just applied for a bunch of other ones as well and ended up with the one that I'm at now. So it kind of just happened in a way. I didn't
Yeah.
really looking for a job at IBM specifically, but I definitely was excited to be offered the opportunity.
That's really cool. So I think you probably have some interviewing wisdom and tips that you could share. What did you do that, you were getting to like second, third round stages, you had another offer? What do you think you did in the interview or said, or how you presented yourself that appealed so well to these different companies?
Yeah, that's a good question. I still ask myself that. I do think I do have a lot of experience interviewing because I did do a lot of internships and stuff like that through college. But I do think I do a good job at selling myself in a way, being able to
Sure.
speak on my experiences and how I learned from them and what I'm able to bring to the table. I'm also very good about sharing that I'm not able to do something, but I'm willing to learn. And that was kind of something that I did within all of my interviews as well. And like I said, I did have a lot of different experiences in my past that I kind of encourage people to like not to shy away from. Although I was applying for designer jobs and I was not a designer, my background was in marketing and advertising. I still spoke to those experiences and I still spoke to my past experiences and the things that I've learned in those other jobs and how they can kind of contribute to my job and my work as a designer because there's still transferable skills and
For
stuff
sure.
like that that I can bring to the table. And that's kind of what I focused on in my interviews.
Yeah, I think one thing that is like really tough that kind of goes against like your instinct is like, so when I'm interviewing designers, I kind of want them to tell me what they like, what they don't like, rather than just saying like, I do it all, I'm happy to do it all, and I want to, do all these things. I want them to kind of be like, I'm very passionate about this. I can try to do this, but this isn't really my strong suit or what I'm best at. And I think you want to make yourself as appealing as possible. But I think having opinions about what you're good at or having lines in the sand of like, this is where my skill set is really strong. This is where I'm less strong. And just being able to attract the right employer.
Right.
And I think I just think that's a hard thing to do to say you're not good at a
Yeah.
specific thing, even if it's like within the spectrum of like UX. I think it's fine. UX is way too big to be good at it all.
Right.
So yeah, that's good. And I think, another interview tip from my experience on the other end, interviewing people, is like speaking with confidence, not being too needy in a sense, just like confident about yourself, your own abilities, and asking the company, why do you think I would be a good fit here? Right. Versus, them asking, why do you want to work here? And then you just kind of have to like grovel and make up all these things like, I would love to work there because you guys are so cool. Yeah. But I just need a job. I want money.
Definitely a good point. I think, especially when you're moving into a new space, it's hard to feel confident because there's so much you don't know. But to an extent, it's kind of like, you know what you know, and it's enough to get an interview. So speak on what you know and speak confidently, kind of in a way like fake it till you make it, kind of express what you can about yourself and what you know and express that you're willing to learn. I think that's the biggest thing. What you don't know, be willing to learn about it.
Absolutely. I think minimizing the gaps when you're interviewing. So maybe say like, maybe you're used to working in a certain tool and the company has a different tool. One way you might answer that is like, I'm pretty familiar with this, but knowing that you guys use this tool, if I was to accept this, I would do my course on my own time, get up to speed and fully know the tool before starting or something like that, just to like minimize any gaps that you might present in the interview.
Definitely. That was actually something I literally went through that exact thing because at IBM, they were currently using Sketch, and in my boot camp, they really only taught us in Figma. And so that was really all I knew. But I was like, I knew a little bit about Sketch and I knew it was similar to Figma. So I was like, I'll take the time to learn what I need to learn about Sketch, and on the job, it's learn as well. And I'm pretty sure I'll be fine. It worked out. So that's
totally. So I think another thing that like designers specifically deal with is imposter syndrome, feeling like they're going to be found out or like they don't know it or they're not good enough. What's your experience been with imposter syndrome?
Yeah. It's an experience that sure if it ever goes away. Even speaking to some of my coworkers, I recently had a conversation about that with one of my coworkers, and we're all kind of just learning as we're on the job. And yeah, it's definitely something I struggle with on a regular basis, on a weekly basis. And I would say it's kind of one of those things where I just have to remind myself that I'm here for a reason. I was hired for a reason. They trusted me enough to be placed on a project or to lead a design for a reason. And they're not, rooting for me to fail or anything like that. They're advocating for me. They want me to succeed. They're there to help me. So I kind of just have to remind myself that like I'm here for a reason. I'm doing good work and I did these other past 10 projects and I was fine. So I'm going to be fine on this one too. So I just it's kind of one of those things where you just have to get out of your head sometimes. And I also think a lot of the times the imposter syndrome comes up when there's things that I don't know. And like there may be something that I'm trying to describe, but I don't know the proper design term for it or something like that. And it's just filling in those gaps by getting answers and asking my teammates and people that I can trust to, not make me feel like I don't know enough or whatever, but somebody that I can go to and ask a question about something and be able to get that answer because I'm more confident because I know what I'm actually talking about. So yeah.
I know. I'm still on calls where people will use acronyms and like on the call, I'm like Googling like, what is this? Like, I don't want to, maybe this is like the most foundational, like low level thing that everyone should know. And I'm just going to like try to Google it.
No.
And so, yeah, I think that happens. That's going to happen to us, throughout our career. But like one thing I think that kind of contributes to imposter syndrome is like a lot of us in UX don't have like a credentialed degree from a university that says like this person spent 4 years doing this. This is their like stamp of approval. It's like some people come from completely different fields. Some people are self-taught and you don't have anything other than your work or your day-to-day experience that people observe that they can look back to and say, this person knows what they're doing. And you always feel like maybe if I say something stupid, people are going to be like, this person does not know what they're doing. Get them out.
That's always the fear. But no, you're definitely right. I'm lucky enough to be on a team where a lot of our designers aren't like formally trained designers. A lot of them do come from different backgrounds. So we kind of share that in that we're all kind of just like figuring it out. But yeah, I definitely think that's a good point because there's always that knowing of that. I kind of just went through like 4 months of school and now I'm here. It's like, what do I really know? So yeah, a lot of what I'm learning is learning it on the job and learning it as I'm going, just learning from the people around me. And luckily enough, I'm on a supportive team where I'm able to go with them and go to them with questions. And if it's a question that's pretty foundational, I can like slack somebody on the side and ask them. But yeah, it definitely makes it easier.
Yeah, I think the other thing to remember is like everyone had to learn this for the first time somewhere, right? Maybe it was online, maybe it was through like a community, or maybe it was on the job. And making someone feel bad for not knowing something isn't a good thing. Like you had to, when was the first time you learned it, right? So, and I think that's the cool thing about the design community is I think people kind of like subconsciously know that. And most people are pretty cool about it. And like you said, your teammates, your employer, they don't want you to fail. They want to help you. They want to close the gaps. And I think it's okay to lean into that and be comfortable with that. And as long as you're producing, moving forward, it's not an issue. I would way rather someone ask me like, what's the component in Figma rather than like, 4 months into the project, be like, what are our personas? Like, obviously you haven't been like paying attention. Maybe you just didn't know, but like, not knowing at the beginning what something is not a big deal, as opposed to like asking dumb questions halfway through a project where you're like basing all of your stuff off of. It's like, again, no dumb questions, but there are better contexts and better times to ask those questions, right? So yeah, I think any junior designer out there, it's hopefully you have a supportive team or community where you can ask those questions. And then obviously we have things like Reddit and Twitter that probably, 1,000 people have asked that same question before. So we're all blessed for that.
And to add to that as well, something I wish I did better starting out in my job was I did ask a lot of questions, but kind of when I'm sitting in the middle of a meeting or sitting in like watching something big that's going on, I didn't do a great job about asking a lot of questions then and really digging into
Mm,
the matter at hand. And I kind of got to that point where that you were mentioning where it's like 4 months in and I'm like, what's this thing again? And I felt like it was probably great to ask that question.
right.
So yeah, I definitely kind of to your point at the beginning, they expect you to ask a lot of questions. You're new to the team, you're a new designer and all that stuff.
Right.
That's the time to get all those questions in. And that's something I wish I did better and kind of just asking everything that I needed to ask to better prepare me for the project and the work to come. But yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah. So, going from boot camp to on the job day to day, how did that translate?
Yeah, it did and it didn't very well. Like I said, my bootcamp definitely gave me a lot of foundational knowledge about UX and being able to at least understand what the process looks like, what some of the practices that will be needed, some of the do's and don'ts of design. I definitely left my bootcamp with enough to be able to do my job. But at the same time, there were a lot of things that a bootcamp just can't prepare you for, which
Right.
regardless of whatever boot camp it is, when you're placed on a real world team, UX processes aren't so linear in the way that you learn them in boot.
Right.
Things are completely different. And there's different processes in place at different companies and different ways that people work and methodologies that people use or teams use to get work done. And yeah, there were just a lot of those things that I wasn't quite prepared for, especially with me coming into tech for the first time. There were just so many things that were completely new to me in terms of like development, product
Totally.
management, knowing how to work with these different teams because designers work very closely with, product management and development and architects and stuff like that. So there's a large learning curve and just be on my team and see how things work, how processes work, and how to get designs done efficiently.
I think what you mentioned about the linear process not always being the case is so very true. And it's probably exacerbated in like an agency like UX Cabin versus a company because it's like there's so many things at play, whether it be like budget, timeline, client whims, like that you have to juggle and be like, okay, well, we're not going to do this part of the process, even though it's like preferred, or we're going to skip this or cut this corner or do more on this. It's like if you've ever seen that meme of like point A to point B and you think it's like that linear line, but really it's like scribbled like all over the place. Yeah, I feel like that's the UX process. And it's like you have these kind of like tools that you pull out, like we're going to, do this process or we're going to go through this exercise. And you need to just kind of have those like ready to pull out, but it's not necessarily like a Lego kit where you're, building it step by step. Not all the time. Like you might have an ideal, you might have, this is what we would like to do, but you got to be flexible and you got to know what to prioritize, what to deprioritize in order to get, the results that you want.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't think I've been on a project yet at my job where it is linear. There's just, especially within a large company too, like within our team, we have researchers, we have UX designers, we have visual designers. So there's never a point for me as a UX designer where I'm going from research to handing it off to development. So there's different processes where it goes through research. And then while research is working, we're still designing. And then visual comes in and starts giving their input. So yeah, it's never just you go from research to personas to journey.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Totally.
That.
So one other question I wanted to ask is you're a junior coming into this and you have certain design skills and abilities, but there's things that you can't do or you don't know that you can do. What are some things that a junior person can do on the team to really, really prove their value that aren't necessarily just tied to UX competency?
I think bringing perspective is a very important thing, or that's something I kind of picked up in starting out as well, because I wasn't initially able to get hands-on on like large projects or anything, but being able to sit in on meetings and share my ideas and share my feedback or thoughts on something that was being worked on, I think was something that was valued amongst my team members, especially coming right out of boot camp. I guess as a junior designer, they kind of expect you to have like fresh eyes and like different perspectives.
Sure.
People have been working on this project for years. So like it's very hard to see outside of it when you're in it every day. So kind of bringing like that fresh perspective and a fresh set of eyes on the work that they were doing, I think was very helpful and something that I think was mentioned that was like a good thing that I brought to the team. It's hard as a junior designer to kind of want to insert your ideas and your point of view. That was something that I had to kind of, kind of learn to find my voice in that. But it was valued. And I think that's something that without doing tangible work that a junior designer can bring.
Yeah, I think there's also like a lot of like hustle tasks that juniors or even like anyone on the team can do, but like a junior can kind of take advantage of those and be like, I'm going to, send like a meeting recap, or I'm going to take really good notes so the team can come look back, or I'm going to just be like really intentional about my like Slack communication, make it super easy for people to get to what they need or be really responsive. There's a lot of things that you can do that everyone should do, but lots of things you can do that you don't need a lot of skill for. And it's just forethought, intentionality, and trying to go above and beyond to make things stupid easy for the rest of your teammates that I really appreciate about people on my team when they go above and beyond. And like, instead of just being like, I updated that thing, it's like, hey, I updated the thing. Here's the Figma link and here's a screenshot embedded in there. And it's like, oh, that's so nice. Like, I don't have to like go and click around and find it. Little things like that really make your team so much better and make you so much more productive. And anyone can do those things.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's definitely a great point. Like taking initiative on some of the smallest of tasks. Because for me, for example, I was kind of, when I first got onto my product, I was placed on a team with a design lead and a visual designer. And I was still getting caught up on what was being worked on. But when I noticed little things in the meeting that needed to be done to kind of take some of the pressure off of my design lead, I would kind of jump in and do that. So it's like, okay,
exactly,
to put these screens into Figma and send them over to the PM. It's like, okay, I can do that. It'll save you a few minutes.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely agree with that. Just being useful in any way that you can and to
totally
contribute.
Totally. So obviously there's going to be a bunch of people here listening. Maybe they're in a boot camp, maybe they're before a boot camp, maybe they're trying to self-learn. What advice would you give them as they're trying to look to, make the dive into product design and kind of get their first job?
Yeah. Oops. That's a good question. If I were thinking about myself and when I was getting into it, I think the advice that I would give is to learn as much as you can. And I think that is a very like general saying, but there is so much within UX and there's so much that people are willing to share about their journeys. And I guess learning from other people and through their experiences. But there's just so much knowledge out there about UX and about getting into UX and things like that. So I think kind of just getting involved and getting in, just learning as much as you can before you get into applying for jobs or get into your actual first role, just learning from other designers and how they went about their journeys and what mistakes they made will definitely kind of help to shape how you may go about it differently. And I think that was a big thing for me, just picking up bits and pieces from different people and kind of seeing about how I wanted to go about it my way and making it work for me in a different way.
What folks or resources or communities have you found to be helpful to you in your journey?
Yeah, well, of course, LinkedIn was kind of my throughout my entire journey. And through that, I think it was really important for me as a Black female designer to also find spaces where I could learn from other people who have been through it and who are in it as Black designers. So one community was UX Her, and that's led by Nandi Manning. And she has a group of designers for female people of color who are able to go in and work on different projects, do different workshops. One of my portfolio pieces actually came from that group, and that group was extremely helpful in just being able to work with other designers and get my skills up outside of my boot camp. And again, I think I mentioned Jessica Gaddis at the beginning of the interview as well. I'm not sure if she's still doing or she still has the group, but she also had a group of designers where she would do workshops and different panels and different things like that for you to learn from other designers and build on your skills. And that was incredibly, incredibly helpful. And then ADP List is another resource for finding design mentors. That was extremely helpful. I found one of my mentors, Ying Yao, through ADP List, and she has been extremely helpful. She helped me in prepping for my interview with IBM and doing my design challenge there and gave me feedback on that before I interviewed. And then she's been with me throughout my entire journey. So yeah, I think just there are different people that I came across as well, and just being able to support me in my career, people that I can just talk about my journey with and get feedback on different things with, and kind of just found my own spaces to really find myself as a designer. It was great.
That's super cool. Yeah. You mentioned LinkedIn, finding a lot of success there. And I've heard lots of stories of people finding success on all sorts of different platforms. It's not like you have to go all in on all of these platforms, but like people finding success or connections or networking on like Twitter or LinkedIn, like you said, or like Dribbble, or there's so many different places that if you're just like, okay, I'm going to focus on this one for a little bit. I'm going to try to make some intentional posts. I'm going to try to make some intentional connections and see what comes of it. Cause like in my experience, nothing but good has ever come from networking, from meeting people, from dropping someone a line and just saying like, hey, appreciate what you're doing, or even ask them the question of like, hey, would you be, willing to do this or that, or, look at this for me. Obviously, you've seen success from that, getting involved. And I would say if you're looking to get into UX or take the next step, you don't have to be posting on all these channels and have like this massive following, but just, some intentionality around the use of some of these platforms can really boost your game and help you out a lot.
Definitely your point of intentionality, especially like with LinkedIn, it's definitely a place where you can share your journey. There's so many people sharing their UX journey and projects they're working on and people they met and things they've learned as they're learning UX. And I think that's a great way to connect with other designers, connect with recruiters and things like that. And yeah, I definitely agree. And being intentional about choosing one or two and really going after it.
Yeah. Well, Danielle, this has been fantastic having you on. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. I hope this inspires so many people. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been great to have the conversation. And thank you for allowing me to share my journey.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for hanging out with us today on the Product Design Podcast. If you enjoyed our conversation, be sure and go follow our guest. Let them know they did a great job and you learned a lot. More to come in the following weeks as we bring on new guests. Please hit that subscribe button so that you will get these podcasts and learn a ton about the product design community. Excited to see you next time. Thanks.